She stood at the altar thinking she had finally found it, the love that would last a lifetime. But on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of her life, she walked into her bridal suite and found her wedding dress altered, without her permission, without a word. The lace sleeves she had chosen, the one detail she had fought for, were gone. And that was only the beginning. What happened next, in front of 22 witnesses, with divorce papers slid across the table like she was nothing, will leave you speechless. But so will what her best friend quietly placed on that same table just seconds later. Because Adrienne Walsh had been underestimated her entire marriage, and she had been quietly preparing for the moment they finally showed her who they really were. This is a story about a woman who lost everything and used every piece of it to build something they could never take away. If this story moves you, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. This content was researched, built, and manually edited by us to bring meaning and lessons.
It was a story I picked up from a source, a single line that sent a chill down my spine. If you can't give this family an heir, then what good are you? Ryan Sterling reportedly said, his voice as cold as the divorce papers he was serving. He did it in front of 22 guests, a smirk playing on his lips. I was told nobody said a thing until Madison's best friend, Chloe, walked over and quietly placed an envelope on the table. A few seconds, that's all it took for the entire atmosphere to change. My source said the smile on Ryan's face didn't just fade, it froze, then shattered. In that single moment, the empire he had so carefully built around himself began to fracture. To understand how a man gets to that point, you have to understand where he came from, and you have to understand the woman he chose to destroy. The story of Ryan Sterling and Madison Walsh began, as I pieced it together, on a Tuesday in June. It was at a charity gala she almost didn't go to. One of those sticky Austin nights, the kind where the humidity follows you inside, even after the sun has long since vanished below the horizon. She'd spent the entire day consumed by her work, immersed in fabric swatches and paint samples at her small but successful interior design studio on South Congress. By 6 o'clock that evening, all she wanted was to curl up on her couch with some takeout. But Chloe Quinn, her best friend from their days at the University of Texas, and now a formidable family law attorney, had a different agenda. "You are going," Chloe had told her that morning, pushing the invitation across the table. "It's for the Children's Literacy Fund. You love books, you love kids, and you need to meet men who aren't your clients." So, Madison went. She stood there in a navy dress she'd had for 3 years, sipping cheap Chardonnay in the grand ballroom of the Driscoll Hotel, feeling completely surrounded by Austin's elite. Chloe had ditched her about 10 minutes in to go network. A force of nature as always. Madison was already plotting her quiet escape when he showed up beside her. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She turned. The man was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that was just beginning to show silver at the temples. He had the kind of effortless confidence that comes from always knowing you belong. His suit was perfectly tailored, his smile designed to put people at ease. "Is it that obvious?" she asked. "Only to someone who feels the same way," he replied, extending a hand. "Ryan Sterling." Madison Walsh. His handshake was firm, warm. "So, Madison Walsh, what do you do when you're not faking your way through charity events?" She laughed, caught off guard. "I'm an interior designer. I have a studio on South Congress." "You're kidding," he said, his interest seeming genuine. "I'm in commercial real estate. I spend most of my days trying to make concrete and steel feel like home. And just like that, the small talk fell away. They dove into a real conversation about architecture, about how Austin was losing its character to generic high rises, about art, and about the shared dream of creating something meaningful that would last. 2 hours felt like 20 minutes. By the time Chloe circled back to find her, Ryan had already gotten her number. Their first date was set for a week later. He chose a rooftop spot with a sweeping view of Ladybird Lake, where the city lights shimmered on the water, making you feel like you were somewhere truly special. He asked about her work, and he really asked, leaning in as if her every word was vital. She told him about her latest project, restoring a historic Clarksville home, and he listened with an intensity she wasn't accustomed to. My family's company, Sterling Properties, is about to break ground on a big mixed-use development downtown, he mentioned over dessert. I'd love to get your take on it. You want it to feel like it belongs here, not just another glass box. Are you seriously asking for a consultation on a first date? She teased. I'm seriously interested in what you have to say. And that was the beginning. For the next 8 months, Ryan became the axis on which her world turned. It happened so fast it should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. They took a long weekend trip to Santa Fe, getting lost in art galleries and talking until the sun came up. They spent Thanksgiving in New Orleans, where he completely won over her mother, Eleanor, promising over beignets that he would always take care of her daughter. He'd bring coffee to her studio on mornings she was facing a deadline, working quietly on his laptop in a corner, just so she wouldn't feel alone. She ended up designing the interiors for his new Riverside project, her biggest commission ever, and he told anyone who would listen that she was the best designer in all of Texas. From what I gathered, for the first time in her adult life, she felt truly seen, not just as a business owner or a friend, but as a woman someone had chosen above all others. Then, 4 months in, came the invitation to meet his parents. The Sterling family estate was nestled in the Westlake Hills, the kind of sprawling property that screams old money long before you reach the front gate. William Sterling opened the door himself, a tall, silver-haired version of his son, with a handshake that felt more like an appraisal. His voice was deep and controlled, the kind that commands a room without raising its volume. Madison, Ryan's told us about you. All good things, I hope, she'd replied. We'll see, he said, with a smile that never touched his eyes. Catherine Sterling, Ryan's mother, was a study in practiced elegance, a woman who had perfected the art of appearances. She greeted Madison with 2 kisses that never made contact and an immediate, sweeping visual inspection. Her dress, her shoes, her noticeable lack of heirloom jewelry. Madison, darling, please come in. We've been so curious to meet you. Dinner felt like an interrogation in a formal dining room built for 20. It was just the 4 of them, and the silence was heavy with unspoken judgment. William inquired about her background, her upbringing, her parents. When she explained that her mother, Eleanor, was a retired school teacher and that her father had passed away when she was 12, he just nodded. And your family's from San Antonio, I understand. He didn't need to ask anything more. The judgment was clear in his tone. Catherine was more subtle, but her questions were just as pointed. Ryan tells us you have your own little business. How ambitious, she'd said. Of course, family is what's truly important, isn't it? Legacy, continuity, the things we pass down. She repeated that sentiment 3 times over the course of the meal, each time with a slightly sharper edge. Ryan, I'm told, was almost silent. When his father pressed Madison about her education, Ryan refilled her water glass. When his mother spoke of the type of woman who could secure a sterling future, he squeezed Madison's hand under the table. She wanted him to step in, to defend her, to tell them she was more than her pedigree. He never did. As they were leaving, Catherine walked her to the door. "I do hope you understand, dear," she said softly. "This family's all about continuity. It is vital to us that Ryan builds something that will last." Madison just smiled. The meaning behind those words weighed on her the entire drive home. "They'll come around," Ryan said, finally breaking the silence. "They're just protective." She chose to believe him. She told herself that every family was complicated, that their love was strong enough to overcome it. 2 months later, in February, Ryan proposed. He took her back to the Driscoll Hotel, to the same ballroom where they first met. He had rented the entire space for the night. It was just the two of them, a string quartet, and a diamond ring that likely cost more than her 6-month salary. He knelt on one knee in the middle of that vast, empty dance floor and said, "You're the person I want to build my future with." And she said yes. She thought she was saying yes to a life they would build as partners. She had no idea she was really saying yes to a trial she was never meant to pass. She didn't know that for the Sterling family, love came with fine print she had never been shown. She had no idea that the man who had listened so intently as she spoke of crown molding and color palettes had already decided she was a temporary arrangement. And she certainly didn't know that saying yes would ultimately cost her the very sense of who she was. Their wedding was in February at the Sterling Estate in Westlake Hills, one of those places where the wealth is so profound it's almost silent. She should have realized something was deeply wrong the moment she walked into the bridal suite and saw her wedding dress. It had been altered. The delicate, vintage-inspired lace sleeves she had fallen in love with, the one specific detail she had insisted upon, were gone. In their place were stark, modern cap sleeves that her future mother-in-law, Catherine, had decided were more appropriate. The lace, she was told, was too fussy. "Mrs. Sterling approved the alteration last week," the seamstress explained, her voice trembling slightly when Madison demanded to know what happened. Last week, and not a single person had bothered to tell her. Chloe found her staring at the dress, her jaw clenched. "Maddie, what is it?" "It's nothing," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just wedding day nerves." Chloe, with her lawyer's nose for deceit, knew better, but she also knew not to push. Instead, she just took her hand and said, "It's not too late to run." Madison laughed as if it were a joke. It had been a whirlwind 2 weeks since the proposal, and now here she was. Catherine had insisted they didn't need a long engagement. She had arranged everything herself: the venue, the food, the flowers, even the photographer. At the time, Madison had thought it was an incredibly generous gesture. Now, as she slipped into a dress that no longer felt like her own, she began to see it for what it was: a takeover. Her mother arrived while she was trying to fix her veil. Eleanor Walsh had driven in from San Antonio that morning, wearing the same simple navy dress she wore for every significant event. She looked small and out of place, surrounded by all the marble and gold. "You look so beautiful, honey," she said, kissing her cheek. Then, in a whisper, she added, "Are you sure about this?" "Mom, I'm sure." "Okay," Eleanor said, gently smoothing her veil. "Just remember you don't owe anybody anything, not even after you say, 'I do.'" Madison didn't understand her mother's warning. Not yet. The ceremony itself took place on the estate's sprawling back lawn, beneath an arbor of vines that probably cost more than her first car. It started, as these stories often do, at a wedding. 150 guests, I'm told, filled those perfect white chairs. They were his people, Richard's business associates, Carol's country club friends, names Madison had never heard. She'd wanted to invite her own life, her friends from college, the contractor she respected, the couple who ran the coffee shop beneath her old studio. But Carol had put a stop to that. "Darling, this is a family event," she'd said, her voice like polished steel. "We need to ensure it's appropriate." Madison ended up with 10 seats. Her mother, her best friend Chloe, and a handful of cousins she hadn't seen in years. They huddled together on the bride's side, a tiny forgotten island in a sea of strangers. Across the aisle, Ryan looked flawless at the altar. He always did. When she finally reached him, he offered that warm, disarming smile, and for a beat, the sick feeling in her stomach vanished. This was the man who brought her coffee in the mornings, who actually listened when she geeked out over color theory, the man who promised they would build a real future together. "You're beautiful," he whispered, and she tried to believe him. The reception that followed was a dizzying performance of champagne toasts and hollow chatter, with people whose eyes slid right past her. Carol, I've learned, was the director of it all, dictating when they cut the cake, when they shared their first dance, when they were to make their rounds. Ryan's hand never left the small of Madison's back, a constant pressure guiding her from one table to the next, as if she were a ship he had to keep from drifting off course. At one point, she found her mother, alone, near the far edge of the reception tent, looking utterly exhausted. "You okay, Mom?" she'd asked. "I'm fine, baby," her mother replied, her eyes scanning the ice sculptures, the string quartet, the towering five-tiered cake. "This is just a lot." Madison tried to brush it off. "It's just one day." "I know," her mother said, patting her hand. "I just hope you don't lose yourself in all this." Madison gave her a kiss and walked away, not allowing herself to process what that warning truly meant. Later, Chloe cornered her in the bridal suite. The door clicked shut, and she leaned against it, arms folded. "Madison, for real, why does his mom get to make every single decision?" "She doesn't," Madison insisted. But the lie was thin. "She picked your dress. She picked the menu. She literally told you who you could and could not invite. She was just helping." "And where was Ryan in all of this?" Madison paused. "He trusts his mom. He just wants everyone to be happy," she'd added. Chloe looked at her then, a long, searching gaze that felt like a cross-examination. "Everyone except you, apparently." "It's one day," Madison repeated, her voice smaller this time. "It doesn't matter." But sources tell me it did matter. It was the beginning of everything that mattered. Their honeymoon was in Napa Valley, at a storybook cottage on a vineyard estate. All rustic beams and panoramic views, it was supposed to be their perfect escape. For the first 2 days, it was. They tasted wine, explored little towns, and sat on the patio at night, dreaming up the life they were supposed to build together. The house they'd buy, the projects they'd tackle. Then, Richard called. "I need you to look over the Riverside contracts," he'd said. And just like that, the honeymoon was over. Ryan's expression morphed from relaxed to focused. "Now, it's time sensitive." He shot Madison an apologetic glance. "Just give me an hour." But 1 hour bled into 2, then 3. Madison sat on that patio by herself, the sun setting over the grapevines, the sound of Ryan's deferential voice floating through the window, repeating, "Yes, Dad," over and over again. She was pretending to be asleep when he finally climbed into bed. This happened 2 more times that week. Each time, Ryan said he was sorry. Each time, Madison said it was fine. By the time their plane touched down in Austin, she had stopped saying anything at all. 2 months later, the illusion shattered completely. She'd kept her design studio after the wedding. It was her sanctuary, the one place she'd built from the ground up, where she felt completely herself. But the rent was a heavy lift, and Ryan began to gently suggest it was an unnecessary expense. "We just bought a house," he said one night. "You could work from home, save on the overhead." "I like having my own space," she told him. "But why? We're married now. Shouldn't we be building our life together?" He said it so calmly, so reasonably, making her feel like the stubborn one. She struggled to find the words. "It's mine. I need something that's just mine." His face fell. "And I'm not enough?" It was a masterfully laid trap. Saying yes would make her selfish. Saying no meant surrendering her last piece of independence. She gave up the studio. A week later, they bought a house in Clarksville, a craftsman bungalow with a sunroom she could convert. It cost $1.2 million. Ryan put down $800,000 from his trust fund. Madison liquidated her entire savings and took out a business loan for her $200,000 share. "See?" Ryan said, tapping the deed where both their names were printed. "This is ours. We're building something together." She wanted to feel that, but what she really felt was the unnerving sense that she'd just been acquired. That night, she stood in the empty sunroom of their new house, trying and failing to picture her future there, trying to imagine her clients walking through her private life. She told herself this was just compromise, that every marriage required adjustment. What she didn't know then was that she was adjusting herself into a stranger. The questions about a baby started almost immediately before the last of the boxes were even unpacked. They'd been in the new house for 2 weeks when Carol called. Madison was in the living room, trying to decide where to hang a painting when her phone buzzed. "Adrian, darling, how's the house?" "It's coming together," Madison said. "I'm sure it will be lovely," Carol purred, then paused. "You know, now that you two have a proper home, we can all start thinking about the next chapter." Madison knew exactly what she meant. "We're still getting used to being married." "Of course, dear, but you're not getting any younger. That biological clock." She said it so casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "When can we expect some good news?" Madison looked at the stacks of boxes at the house that still felt like a stage set. "We're just enjoying being newlyweds right now," she managed. "Well, don't wait too long," Carol warned before delivering the summons. "I've invited you both to Easter dinner next month. The whole family will be there." The whole family, Madison knew, meant Richard's executives, Carol's friends, and a web of distant cousins she'd never met. It was an audience of 15 people, all there to watch her perform. Easter Sunday arrived, warm and suffocating. The estate was awash in pastels, a scene of perfect manufactured tradition. Madison wore a yellow dress Carol had once approved of, a calculated attempt to fly under the radar. It didn't work. They were halfway through dinner when Carol made her move. "So," she announced, her voice carrying across the table, silencing all other conversation. "When can we expect an announcement?" 14 faces swiveled to stare at Madison. "An announcement?" Madison asked, trying to feign confusion. "A baby, dear," Carol said, her smile tight. "You've been married, what, 2 months now?" Surely you've been trying. Heat rushed to Madison's face. Under the table, Ryan's hand found hers, but it wasn't a comfort. It was an anchor. He said nothing. We're taking our time, Madison mumbled. The clock is ticking, sweetheart, Carol replied, her smile never faltering as she turned to the woman beside her. Young people today, they just wait and wait. I'm told Madison wanted to scream, to tell her that her body wasn't a topic for dinner conversation. That 2 months of marriage didn't give her ownership of her uterus. Instead, she just smiled and sipped her wine, feeling Ryan's hand squeeze hers in a gesture that felt less like solidarity and more like a command to stay quiet. From that day on, it became a ritual. Every family dinner, twice a month, Carol would ask. Sometimes it was subtle. Any news? Other times, it was a direct hit. Still no luck? Richard never asked outright, but Madison once overheard him in his study with Ryan. A man without an heir, he'd said, is a man without a legacy. Ryan's reply was too quiet to hear. Carol started calling every Wednesday, just checking in, before launching into invasive questions about Madison's health. Soon, Madison began letting all her calls go to voicemail. Then, one day in June, she found the photograph. It was in a box of old family photos Ryan had brought from storage. At the very bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a frame she didn't recognize. The woman inside was elegant, maybe 60, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She wore a simple pearl necklace and a smile that looked completely real. There was a warmth to her that felt alien in that family. "Who is this?" Madison asked Ryan that night. He glanced up from his laptop. "That's my grandmother, Eleanor, my dad's mom." "She's beautiful," Madison said. "I don't think you've ever mentioned her." "She died in 2016, before we met," he said, already turning back to his screen. "I didn't really know her. She and my dad weren't close." "Why not?" "I don't know, family stuff," he said, and the tone in his voice shut the door on any further questions. Madison studied the picture for a moment longer before placing it on the bookshelf. There was a softness in Eleanor's face, a quality she'd never seen in Richard. She wanted to know more, but Ryan was already on another work call. 2 weeks later, Richard came to their house for the first time. It was clear this wasn't a social visit, it was an inspection. He moved through the rooms with a critical eye, his gaze finally landing on the bookshelf in the living room. It stopped, cold, on the photo of Eleanor. The story, as I've pieced it together, began with a photograph. It was of a woman named Eleanor, Ryan's mother, found in a box from storage. When his wife Madison showed it to him, Ryan's face was a blank wall. He claimed his mother had strange ideas about legacy, that she didn't grasp what family required. When Madison pressed him, he simply dismissed it as unimportant before turning the photo face down, hiding Eleanor from view. "Some things are better left in the past," he'd said. But the image of Eleanor's kind eyes stuck with Madison. A source told me she couldn't understand why Ryan spoke of his own mother with such coldness. When she later asked Ryan about it, he just said they never got along, something about business disagreements. He called it ancient history, and for a while, she let it be. She had more immediate concerns, I discovered. By that September, 6 months into their marriage, Madison wasn't pregnant. At first, it was easy to dismiss. They were navigating the chaos of newlywed life. But the relentless pressure from Ryan's family had started to feel suffocating. She began meticulously tracking her cycle, turning intimacy into a calculated project. The arrival of her period each month felt like a profound failure. Ryan felt the tension too, though he tried to conceal it behind late nights at the office and tense phone calls with his father, Mark. One evening in early October, he found Madison in their bathroom, staring down at yet another negative pregnancy test, the disappointment thick in the air. He tried to soothe her, but the dam broke. She told him how his family's constant questions felt like an interrogation, how his father's talk of legacies haunted her. "They're relentless," she said. It was then that Ryan, sitting on the edge of the tub, pulled her close and made a suggestion. "Maybe we should see a doctor," he proposed, just to be sure. 6 months wasn't a long time, she argued. He countered that it would give them peace of mind, and, more importantly, it would get his parents off their backs. I learned that, in that moment, she saw the exhaustion in his face, the worry and a flicker of something close to desperation. She looked at the man she thought would be her shield and agreed. They would make an appointment. He promised they would figure it out together. A team. She wanted to believe him. The appointment was with a Dr. Alan Peterson, an OB/GYN highly recommended by Mark as the best in Austin. Madison told my source she thought she was taking a step toward a solution. She had no idea she was walking straight into a meticulously planned deception. The doctor's office was designed to be disarming, filled with the scent of lavender and soft, spa-like colors. Madison recalled the anxious feeling in her stomach, a stark contrast to the tranquil setting. Ryan's hand rested on her knee, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but the whole scene felt staged, too perfect to be real. When a nurse called for Mrs. Miller, Ryan squeezed Madison's hand and asked if she wanted him to come in with her. She just nodded, unable to find her voice. It was clear she was terrified, and he was positioning himself as her rock, her steady guide through the uncertainty. Dr. Alan Peterson was exactly the kind of man Mark Miller would endorse. Late 50s, a glint of an expensive watch, and an air of absolute authority. He looked out over downtown Austin from his high-rise office and greeted Madison by her first name, immediately launching into the reason for their visit. He noted they'd been trying for about 6 months and that Madison had mentioned irregular cycles. This was true. Her periods had always been a bit unpredictable, but it had never been a major concern before. The ultrasound that followed was a cold, impersonal procedure, a blur of gray shapes she couldn't decipher on a screen. She remembered Dr. Peterson murmuring quietly to his technician, ignoring her questions with a detached professionalism. He promised he would explain everything soon. Following the ultrasound, 3 vials of blood were drawn from her arm and sent off to a lab. The results, he told them, would be ready in a week. That week was agonizing. Madison tried to lose herself in her work, but every phone call made her heart leap. Throughout it all, Ryan was the picture of a supportive husband. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," became his constant refrain. The follow-up was scheduled for a bleak Thursday morning where they sat across from the doctor's polished desk. This was the moment everything changed. Dr. Peterson explained that her tests indicated polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS. He turned his monitor to show her the evidence, images of her ovaries lined with small dark circles he compared to a string of pearls. He explained it was a hormonal condition. He told her that her ovaries were producing an excess of immature follicles, elevating certain hormone levels. When Madison asked what that meant for them, her voice barely a whisper, the diagnosis was delivered. Conceiving naturally would be difficult, he said, glancing at Ryan, but not impossible. It would just take longer. He laid out a potential future of medical interventions: ovulation induction, maybe even IVF. The word difficult echoed in Madison's mind. The doctor assured them it was a manageable condition, outlining a plan to start her on prenatal vitamins and monitor her cycles closely. If she wasn't pregnant in another 6 months, they would discuss the next steps. Ryan took her hand, his resolve firm. "We'll do whatever's necessary," he told the doctor, who nodded with approval. But Madison just stared at the screen, at the tiny dark circles that had suddenly become the explanation for everything. She asked if she had done something wrong, a question born of shame and confusion. Dr. Peterson was quick to reassure her that PCOS wasn't her fault, that it was a medical condition she hadn't chosen. But I was told that, for Madison, it still felt like a judgment, a verdict on her body's failure. She held herself together until they were back in the parking garage. As Ryan went inside to schedule their next appointment, the composure crumbled and the tears started. She called her mother, Carol, who immediately sensed her distress. "I can't have kids," Madison sobbed into the phone. That wasn't precisely what the doctor had said, but it was the emotional truth of the moment. Her mother's response was fierce and immediate. "Your worth is not in your womb," Carol told her. "You are not broken." She tried to counter the doctor's diagnosis with a mother's love, insisting her daughter was brilliant and whole, no matter what any test said. When Ryan returned to the car, Madison wiped her eyes and said she was fine. Later that night, she called his sister, Jessica, perhaps hoping for a shred of sympathy. She explained the diagnosis, the medical terms, the uncertainty. There was a long, telling pause on the other end of the line. "So, that's it," Jessica finally said. It wasn't a question or an expression of sorrow. It was a confirmation. Madison was the problem. But the reaction from Ryan's father, Mark, was even colder. At dinner the following Sunday, Ryan quietly told him the news. I learned that Mark's response was chillingly pragmatic. "Well," he said, not even looking up from his steak, "that explains it." He spoke as if Madison were a faulty piece of machinery. After that, she stopped attending the family dinners. Ryan went by himself, covering for her with excuses about work. She didn't have the strength to face their unconcealed disappointment anymore. Her work became her only sanctuary. She poured all her energy into the Greg Turner project, a luxury condo development downtown. Greg, a business associate of Ryan's, was one of the few people in their circle who treated her as a respected professional, not as Ryan Miller's defective wife. But even there, Ryan asserted his control. During their first design meeting, which Ryan insisted on attending, he shot down Greg's suggestions for the project's aesthetic. He publicly told Greg, a man with decades of experience, to focus on the numbers and let him handle the creative vision. Greg fell silent, his frustration barely concealed. Because Ryan was Mark Miller's son, his authority went unchallenged. It was another instance of Ryan subtly undermining Madison, isolating her professionally. She made a note to connect with Greg later, recognizing his ideas were far better than her husband's. It was about a week after the diagnosis that the deception took its final physical form. Ryan started bringing Madison vitamins. "Dr. Peterson said you should start taking these," he told her one morning, offering a bottle of pills. They were prenatals, he said, to help prepare her body. But the bottle was unmarked. The only label was from the pharmacy. "Madison Miller, take one daily." He explained they were a special prescription, that the over-the-counter versions weren't potent enough for her condition. These, he claimed, were medical grade. The pills themselves looked harmless, small, round, and pale pink. She asked how long she'd need to take them. "Indefinitely," he replied, saying they would help regulate her hormones. It all seemed logical. She trusted the doctor, and she trusted her husband. So, every morning, she took one of the pills as he watched, his smile and kiss on her forehead, a daily ritual of reassurance. "We're going to get through this," he'd say, and she believed him. From what I've been told, those first 2 years of Madison's marriage to Ryan Tyler were like a slow, deliberate drowning. The loss of self is rarely a sudden event. It's a creeping tide you don't notice until you're already underwater. It started with the little things, the insidious compromises. At dinner parties, her opinions began to vanish, replaced by Ryan's confident pronouncements. Madison finds the new city council proposal fascinating, he would declare, even though she hadn't said a word about it. I learned that she mastered the art of the placid nod and the vacant smile. Soon, friends stopped getting invitations to their home. Her best friend Olivia visited once in early 2022, and sources say Ryan spent the whole night radiating impatience. "I thought this was our night," he'd said after Olivia left, his tone less angry than wounded. Madison never invited her over again. That's when Ryan's mother, Jessica, began her campaign of wardrobe suggestions. "Darling, isn't that necklace a touch loud for brunch?" she'd ask, and Madison would quietly remove it. By that summer, her closet had become a sea of muted colors. The grays and creams that Jessica favored. Anything that might draw attention was gone. I saw a picture from her wedding day. It was impossible to reconcile the vibrant woman in a yellow dress with the person she became. Intimacy, I'm told, dwindled into a cold, scheduled obligation. Maybe once a month. Ryan's excuse was always the same. He was exhausted, stressed from work. He'd just roll over and face the wall. Madison tried to convince herself that this was just the normal settling of a marriage. She pushed away the thought of how rarely he even looked at her anymore. At the twice-monthly family dinners, a suffocating ritual, she became utterly invisible. Jessica would inquire about her health with the same detached concern one might have for a faulty appliance. "Any progress, dear?" That one word, progress, told Madison everything. Her body was seen as a project, one that was failing to meet its deadlines. She'd just shake her head, and the conversation would glide right past her. It was during one of those dinners in the summer of 2022 that Jessica casually mentioned a name. "Do you know Chloe Evans?" she asked, slicing her salmon. "Such a lovely girl. I believe she's doing very well in tech consulting up in Seattle." "I don't believe so," Madison replied. "Oh, she and Ryan were inseparable for a time. Before you, of course," Jessica added with a serene smile. Ancient history. A source at that dinner noted that Ryan's jaw went rigid, but he remained silent. Madison didn't push. She was so focused on surviving the present that she had no energy left to excavate his past. It was her friend, Olivia, who finally forced a confrontation that July during a rare coffee outing that Madison had to negotiate for, like a parole hearing. Sitting at their old spot, Olivia studied her friend's face intently. "When's the last time you actually said no to them?" she asked. "To who?" Madison murmured. "The Tylers, Ryan, any of them." Madison just stirred her latte, the memory refusing to surface. "Because you used to be the person who argued with me about paint swatches, the designer who told clients their ideas were awful." "That's not true," Madison insisted weakly. "Okay, when did you last wear that turquoise bracelet I gave you? The one you never took off?" Madison glanced down at her own bare wrist. She couldn't recall putting it away, but it had been months, maybe longer. "Maddie," Olivia's voice softened with a painful clarity, "you're disappearing." Madison wanted to fight back, to defend the life she'd chosen. But the words wouldn't come, because when she tried to remember the last time she'd felt like herself, all she found was an empty space. What she didn't know was that her fate had been sealed by a choice Ryan made years before they met. The story goes that in the summer of 2018, a 30-year-old Ryan was sitting in a board meeting when a colleague, Greg Miller, mentioned his wife's unexpected pregnancy. "Congratulations," his father, William, had said. The man gave an uneasy laugh. "A bit of a shock, actually. I had a vasectomy 4 years ago." Another board member chimed in. "I thought those were foolproof." "So did I," Greg replied. "Apparently they can just reverse themselves. Spontaneous recanalization, the doctor called it. A 1 in 1,000 fluke." "So now we're starting all over with a newborn at 45, he'd lamented. For Ryan, who deeply resented the idea of children and the freedom they would cost him, a cold dread set in. That 1 in 1,000 chance was a risk he wouldn't take. 2 weeks later, my investigation uncovered he drove to a clinic in San Antonio, paid in cash for the same procedure, and told no one. Not his parents, not his friends. And certainly not the women he dated and discarded the moment they hinted at a future. But that colleague's story never left him. What if his failed too? So when he met Madison in 2020, a woman his parents deemed suitable, he devised a cruel and foolproof insurance policy. The vasectomy was already in place, but just in case, he would give her birth control pills, carefully repackaged and presented as fertility supplements. He had double protection. He had total control. Madison swallowed those pills every single morning, believing they were preparing her body for a child that Ryan had ensured would never exist. By December of 2022, she had perfected the art of taking up less space. I was told she excused herself from a family dinner only to overhear William and Ryan in the hall. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider your options," William said in a low voice. She froze, hidden behind the door. "You've given it 2 years," he continued. "No one could fault you." They were talking about getting rid of her. She had failed so completely at her one job that even William, a man obsessed with legacy and appearances, was ready to write her off as a loss. She returned to the table and somehow finished her meal, her face a pale mask no one seemed to notice. The company gala in August 2023 was at the same hotel where she'd met Ryan 3 years prior. She was wearing a gray dress Jessica had picked out. She smiled at faces she no longer tried to remember. Across the vast ballroom, Ryan stood with his father, deep in conversation, and didn't look at her once. She sat at their table, a solitary figure, feeling like a piece of misplaced furniture he couldn't be bothered with. In the ladies' room, under the harsh, clinical lighting, she stared at her own reflection. She saw a woman in a drab dress, her eyes hollow, her shoulders slumped inward as if bracing for a blow. Her jewelry was minimal, her hair styled exactly as Jessica liked it. She looked just like every other corporate wife in that room, polished, pleasant, and utterly vacant. This person wasn't the fiery designer who'd opened her own studio at 24, who argued with contractors and wore color like a declaration. She touched the mirror, but the stranger moved with her. That stranger was her. Back in the ballroom, Ryan was still oblivious. In the silent car ride home, a terrible realization washed over her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd said something she truly meant. Couldn't remember who she was before she became Mrs. Ryan Tyler, before she became the problem to be solved. She caught her own eyes in the rearview mirror, and saw a complete stranger staring back. By that fall, she was unraveling. September brought its oppressive Texas heat, but inside, Madison was perpetually cold. Lying beside Ryan at night, she'd wonder when, exactly, she had ceased to be a person in his eyes and become a liability to be managed. The call from Jessica came on a Tuesday. Madison was in her home office. The sunroom Ryan had promised would be her creative space, though he now resented every client she met with. "Adrian, darling, how are you feeling?" Jessica began. "I'm fine." "You sound tired." Jessica paused, a clear prelude to another demand. "I've been thinking, perhaps it's time you took a break from work, just for a while, to focus on your health. All that stress can't be good for fertility." I'm told Madison's grip on her pencil tightened. Her work was the last piece of her old life, the only place her decision still held weight. And Jessica wanted her to surrender it. "I'll think about it," Madison said. "I'm only trying to help, dear. We all want the same thing for you." After the call, Madison sat staring at her designs. A scream built in her throat, a protest that her body wasn't their business venture, that they were the ones destroying her. But all that came out was a whisper to the empty room. "I'll think about it." A week later, during another Sunday dinner, she overheard them again. William and Ryan, their voices drifting from the study. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider your options." It was William. "What do you mean?" Ryan asked, his voice low. "You know exactly what I mean. You've given it 2 years. Condition or not, this isn't working." "No one would blame you," William finished. A silence hung in the air. "I'll think about it," Ryan finally said. The same passive, compliant word she had used. It was the family code for yes. They were discussing the terms of her disposal. She walked back to the table, finished her dinner, and even smiled when offered dessert. No one saw that her hands were trembling uncontrollably. That night, she finally broke. My source said it wasn't one specific thing. It was the crushing weight of William's voice, the vacant look in Ryan's eyes, the sheer exhaustion of holding herself together for 2 solid years. She ended up in the shower, still fully dressed, letting the water pour over her as she sobbed with a violence that stole her breath. Ugly, choking sounds she had swallowed for months finally escaped. She pressed her head to the cold tile, her body shaking apart. Ryan knocked. "Are you okay in there?" Silence. He knocked again. "Madison." But the woman he was calling for was already gone. From what I've gathered, the beginning of the end for Ryan Sterling wasn't some grand explosion, but the quiet click of a bathroom lock. It was the first time his wife, Madison, had ever put a physical barrier between them. He rattled the handle, his voice laced with confusion. "Why'd you lock the door?" Her reply was a whisper, a stranger's voice in her own throat. "Just give me a minute." After he walked away, she stood under the water until it turned ice cold, the fabric of her dress clinging to her skin. By the time she emerged, Ryan was already feigning sleep. It was in that moment, she told me, the carefully constructed illusion of her marriage began to dissolve. Ryan wasn't her partner. He was her warden. He was an integral part of the system designed to break her spirit. So that November, she committed her first real act of defiance. She walked into a downtown bank and opened a checking account Ryan knew nothing about. When the teller asked if she wanted to add her husband to the account, her answer was a firm and simple no. From then on, with every client payment, she would quietly divert a small portion, before depositing the rest into their joint account. $200 from one invoice, $500 from another. It was never enough for Ryan to notice, but it was becoming a lifeline, an escape fund for a future she was just beginning to imagine. The week before Thanksgiving, her mother, Carol, called with an announcement, not a question. "I'm driving up. I'll be there Tuesday." When Madison tried to protest, her mother's response was resolute. "I'm coming." She arrived with a small bag and the same protective fire in her eyes Madison remembered from her childhood. That evening, sitting in the kitchen, the house felt safer with her mother there. "Honey, you look like you're fading away," Carol said gently. Madison tried to deflect, but her mother saw right through it, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Listen to me," she insisted. "You don't owe that family a child. You don't owe them a single thing. If I can't give them what they want, I'm worthless to them," Madison confessed. Carol's voice was soft but powerful. "Then, you're worthless to the wrong people. Your value isn't tied to continuing someone else's family line. Do you understand me?" And for the first time, hearing those words after everything Ryan had put her through, she did. It might have been his father's booming voice still echoing in her memory, or the image of that locked bathroom door. It might have been the secret bank account that represented a sliver of hope. "I can't go to their Thanksgiving dinner," she said out loud. "Good," her mother replied. "Let Ryan be upset." It sounded so straightforward, so possible. For 2 years, she had learned that choosing herself meant failing the man she married. But standing there, she realized he wasn't the one who mattered. Thanksgiving passed. Ryan went to his parents' estate alone. Madison stayed home with her mother, ate Chinese takeout, and offered no apologies. It was the first time in years she felt she could truly breathe. She couldn't have known that in just 2 weeks the ground would fall out from beneath her. She couldn't have known about the old phone, the text messages, the entire truth of Ryan's deception hidden in a dormant device. All she knew was that she had locked a door, opened an account, and said no. These were her first small steps toward freedom. She had been putting on a performance for an audience that was never going to give her a curtain call. The show was over. The first thread of Ryan's elaborate lie unraveled by pure chance. He had flown to Denver for a supposed 3-day business trip, and for the first time in months, the house felt light without him. She was in his home office, looking for an old contract, when she noticed his bottom left desk drawer was locked. She remembered seeing him open it with a small brass key, the cheap kind you get with flat pack furniture. She had found that very key weeks ago, tucked away in the pocket of a coat he no longer wore. She told herself she was just being curious, that a wife had a right to look through drawers in her own house. But her hands trembled as the lock turned. Inside, she found old tax documents from 2019, some business cards, and, wrapped in cloth at the bottom, an old cell phone. It was an iPhone 11, the model Ryan had before his upgrade last year. The battery was dead. She almost put it back, but an instinct she couldn't explain made her take it to her own office and plug it in. The screen flickered to life, showing the lock screen for a moment before opening directly to the home screen. There was no passcode. It was frozen on a text message conversation with a contact named Jessica B. Her stomach plummeted as she read the date. April 2023, 8 months ago. The messages laid Ryan's entire scheme bare. He told Jessica he missed her, that marrying Madison was a mistake his father had insisted upon, and that it won't be forever. "I'm working on it," one of Ryan's texts read. When Jessica pressed him about what that meant, he was vague. simply asking for more time. Madison's world started to spin. As she scrolled up, she saw more messages stretching back for months, a slow, painful negotiation built on the lie that was her marriage. Her hands were steady now, a strange calm washing over her as she photographed every screen. Then she called her best friend, Chloe. "I need you to come over now." When Chloe asked what was wrong, Madison's voice was flat. "I found something." Chloe was there in 25 minutes, and Madison handed her the phone without a word. She watched her friend's face morph from confusion to dawning horror, and then to the cold, sharp focus of the lawyer she was. "Okay," Chloe said, placing the phone on the table as if it were a bomb. "Listen to me very carefully. You are not going to confront him with this. Not yet." "Madison, listen," Chloe said, grabbing her shoulders. "We have to be smart. Powerful men like Ryan, from families like the Sterlings, they don't lose because you catch them. They lose because you build a case so airtight they have no room to move." She looked Madison in the eye. "Do you trust me?" Madison nodded. "Then we gather everything." A flicker of memory crossed Chloe's face. "My mother went through something like this," she said, her voice softening. "Her family cut her off when she divorced my dad. They called her an embarrassment. I watched her fight for everything she had for years." She paused, then leaned in. "Ryan's aunt, his father's own sister, went through something even worse. I know because I briefly dated her son Tyler in law school." She explained how the woman had left an abusive marriage back in 2005. She had gone to her brother, Ryan's father, asking for help. He told her she had made her bed and was shaming the family. Then he cut her off. The entire Sterling family followed his lead, leaving her with nothing. She raised Tyler alone, working 2 jobs. He was 14, old enough to see exactly what his uncle had done. "Tyler hasn't spoken to his uncle in 10 years, Chloe continued. "He built his own life, and he despises everything the Sterling family stands for." Madison finally understood. "You're telling me this because Tyler will help us. He's been waiting for a chance to show the world who his family really is." "And because you need to know what you're up against," Chloe said, her tone hardening. "The Sterlings destroy women who don't play by their rules. My mom just barely made it. Tyler's mom died 5 years ago, still an outcast from her own family. I am not going to let Ryan do that to you." "What do we do?" Madison asked, her voice barely a whisper. Chloe was already typing on her phone. "First, financials. Joint accounts, credit cards, we track all of it. Second, your medical records, especially everything related to the pills Ryan has been giving you. Third, communications. We need to see what else he's been hiding." "Some of it," Chloe explained, "they could get legally since Madison was his wife." "Some of it," she said, meeting Madison's gaze, "we'll need help with. I know a good PI, and Tyler has contacts." When Madison hesitated, Chloe was firm. "You're not dragging anyone into this, Madison. You're finally letting people help you." A dam inside her broke, a flood of relief and terror all at once. "Okay," she whispered. "Tell me what to do." The instructions were simple. "For now, you act normal. Ryan comes home tomorrow. You greet him with a smile. You give him no reason to suspect that anything has changed. Can you do that?" Madison thought about the past 2 years of her life with Ryan. The silent dinners, the forced smiles at family events, the lonely nights spent wondering what was wrong with her. She had been playing a part all along. "I can do that," she said. Chloe nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'll call Tyler tonight." After Chloe left, Madison picked up Ryan's phone one last time, rereading his cold, calculated words. This was a mistake. It won't be forever. Something inside her turned to steel. All this time, she thought she was the one who was broken. She wasn't the problem, she was the project. She plugged the phone back in and placed it exactly where she found it. I learned the story began with the click of a lock. It was the moment Madison knew for sure. After securing the drawer, she slid the key back into the pocket of his winter coat, a quiet act of defiance. This was a game of secrets, and she was finally playing too. At the time, she had no idea about the audio file she would later uncover, or the pills, or the tangled web of control Ryan had woven years before she ever entered his life. But she knew enough to understand she wasn't losing her mind. And she knew this was far from over. For 2 weeks, Madison transformed her life into a covert operation. Her friend Jessica, a lawyer, had provided a roadmap scribbled on a napkin the night Madison first suspected Ryan's infidelity. It was a list: finances, communications, medical history, potential allies. Moving through her own home with the silence of a specter, she began to check off the items. She'd opened drawers Ryan believed were sacred and photographed the contents. She operated on the assumption that he would never suspect her of copying files from his laptop while he slept just one room away. His work had him on the road constantly, 3 days in Denver, followed by trips to Dallas and Houston. And she used every single minute of his absence. The house had never felt so vast, so empty. Yet, it pulsed with the tension of a crime scene she was meticulously documenting. The first pieces of evidence she gathered were the bank statements. Their joint account, the very one Ryan had insisted on for the sake of transparency when they married, told a damning story. Over the last year, 15 separate transfers had been made to an entity named SB Consulting. The payments were irregular: $5,000 one month, $10,000 the next. But they tallied up to a staggering $75,000, all funneled to a Seattle-based company that had no digital footprint in any legitimate business registry. It took Jessica less than an hour, using her firm's legal databases, to find the company's registration. The owner was listed as Olivia Blake, with a registered address in a luxury high-rise in downtown Seattle. The date of incorporation was March of 2023, just 1 month after Madison and Ryan had their first significant argument about funding for her design studio. As Madison sat at her kitchen table staring at the printouts, the numbers began to feel like a cruel joke. He had been financing another woman's life with their money. With her money, $75,000 had been quietly siphoned from their shared future, while he lectured her about being more careful with spending, citing an uncertain real estate market. She had believed him completely. She had scaled back on supplies for her studio and declined lunches with friends, all because she thought they were saving for something together. And all that time, he was constructing a parallel life, funding it with the very money she was helping to earn. The next discovery, a medical record, would change the entire scope of her investigation. Jessica had requested it from a clinic I'd never heard of. Men's health specialists in San Antonio, a 2-hour drive south of Austin. The consent form arrived in a plain manila envelope, and Madison opened it at Jessica's kitchen table as her friend poured coffee. The patient's name was Ryan James Sterling. His date of birth was March 14, 1985. The procedure had taken place on July 15, 2018, when he was 30 years old. And the procedure itself was a bilateral vasectomy performed via the surgical ligation method. Madison had to read the words twice for them to register. I'm told Jessica leaned over her shoulder, her breath catching in her throat. "Surgical ligation," she murmured, her finger tapping the line. That's an older method, Jessica explained. They literally tie off the vas deferens with stitches instead of cauterizing it. It's quicker and cheaper, but the failure rate is significantly higher than with modern techniques. Madison looked up at her, confused. What does that mean? Jessica then pulled a second page from the envelope. It was a post-operative instruction sheet with a bolded section recommending follow-up appointments. The sheet suggested appointments at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year post-op. Below that, a note scrawled in blue ink read, "Patient declined follow-up semen analysis." Jessica's face hardened. "He never went back," she said. "Standard practice after a vasectomy is to confirm a 0 sperm count at the 3 and 6 month marks. By skipping those appointments, Ryan would have had no definitive proof that the procedure had actually been successful." A cold, heavy feeling settled in Madison's chest. "Why would he skip them?" she asked. Jessica set the document down. "Arrogance, maybe denial. He probably just assumed it was 100% effective, but they aren't, especially for younger men. Studies have shown that men under 35 have a recanalization rate as high as 1%. The vas deferens can literally heal and grow back together, particularly with the ligation method, where it's just tied off. If Ryan never went back to verify his sperm count had dropped to 0, he was moving through the world with no clue whether he was actually sterile." Staring at the form, Madison tried to absorb the implications. Ryan was only 30 years old when he walked into that clinic, a full 5 years before he even met her. He had made the choice to never have children, signed the papers, and then never bothered to confirm if his body had complied. And if that vasectomy had failed without his knowledge, then the pills he'd been giving her every morning weren't merely an act of control. They were his insurance policy, a second line of defense in case his own body had quietly betrayed his intentions. Jessica must have seen the dawning horror on her friend's face because she reached across the table and took her hand. "He built a system," she said softly. "It was a system with 2 layers of control, and in his mind, it was utterly foolproof." The recording surfaced 1 week before Christmas. Jessica had given Madison a voice-activated recorder, no bigger than a USB drive, the kind favored by private eyes. She instructed her to plant it in Ryan's car. "It's a legal gray area," Jessica admitted, her mind already navigating the potential courtroom battles. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings, but this was technically 0-party since neither of them would be present. "I'm not saying it's admissible in court," Jessica clarified. "I'm saying it will give us leverage." One night while Ryan was in the shower, Madison slipped the device under the passenger seat of his Audi, her hands trembling so intensely she almost dropped it twice. 3 days after that, she and Jessica sat in a downtown office, listening to the audio through a laptop's speakers. The quality was startlingly clear. The first voice belonged to Ryan's father, Richard, his tone low and authoritative, the kind he used when delivering a verdict he expected to be final. "It's time to end this, Ryan," cleanly and quietly. "We'll offer her the house and $200,000 in cash. She'll sign the NDA." A brief silence followed, filled only by the sound of tires on the road. Then came Ryan's voice, softer and more uncertain than Madison had ever heard it. "What about the house? We bought it together. Her name is on the deed." Richard's laugh was sharp and devoid of humor. "The house stays in the family. We will buy out her share. She takes the money, signs the papers, and she disappears." Richard continued. "Olivia is ready. You can make the engagement public on Valentine's Day if you want. A clean break, a fresh start. After another pause, Ryan asked, "And if she doesn't sign?" Richard's tone remained chillingly level. "She will. Women like her always do. They take what they're offered and they move on." Then the recording clicked off. Jessica stopped the playback and met Madison's eyes from across the desk. Madison couldn't find her voice. She had known they wanted her out of the picture. She'd read the text messages and found the bank transfers. But to hear them orchestrate her exit like a corporate merger, to hear Richard dismiss her as women like her, caused something inside her to harden into pure, cold fury. They underestimated you," Jessica stated quietly. Madison could only nod. They had, and she was determined to make them regret it. In the days that followed, sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, managing no more than 3 hours a night. Her hands shook when she tried to pour coffee. The smell of food turned her stomach. Jessica noticed immediately. "You look like hell," she said during a phone call. 2 days after they had listened to Richard Sterling plan her erasure, Jessica's voice left no room for debate. "When was the last time you ate?" Madison couldn't recall. "You need to see a doctor," Jessica insisted. "Not Dr. Evans, someone who isn't on Richard's payroll." She personally drove Madison to see Dr. Miller, an OB-GYN, whose office was in a turquoise-painted house on South Congress that felt more like an art gallery than a medical clinic. The waiting room had the calming scent of lavender, and the walls were adorned with art by local painters. With unsteady hands, Madison filled out the intake forms while Jessica sat beside her, a silent guardian scrolling through her phone. Dr. Miller, a woman in her early 50s with gray hair and a neat bun, possessed a serenity that seemed unshakable. Dr. Miller asked questions Madison wasn't prepared for. "When was your last period?" Madison had to think. 6, maybe 7 weeks ago. The doctor noted it down. Nausea, fatigue, breast tenderness. Madison admitted to all of it, adding, "But I just thought it was the stress." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "Let's run a quick test." 10 minutes later, Madison was on an exam table in a paper gown, staring at the ceiling. Dr. Miller moved an ultrasound wand across her abdomen. The machine hummed, and then a new sound filled the room, a rapid, rhythmic beat, like a tiny galloping horse. "Is that—" Madison began. "That's a heartbeat," Dr. Miller said gently. "You're about 6 weeks pregnant, Madison." The room seemed to spin. She gripped the edge of the table. "That's impossible. I have PCOS." "Dr. Evans said I would have trouble conceiving," Madison explained. Frowning, Dr. Miller pulled up her old medical records on the computer. She scrolled through them, her frown deepening. "I'm looking at your labs from 2021. You have slightly elevated testosterone and a few small ovarian cysts. This is a very mild case of PCOS at best. It certainly wouldn't prevent pregnancy." "But," he said. "He exaggerated," Dr. Miller stated flatly. "Or," the doctor added, "he lied." Madison felt as though she were drowning in the quiet room. Dr. Miller leaned forward. "Madison, are you taking any medications? Birth control, perhaps prenatal vitamins?" "Prenatal vitamins," Madison whispered. "My husband gives them to me every morning." The doctor's expression changed instantly. "Can you bring me the bottle?" An hour later, Jessica returned with the orange prescription bottle from their bathroom. Dr. Miller unscrewed the cap, tipped a single pill into her palm, and then looked directly at Madison. "This is not a prenatal vitamin," she said. "This is Lostrin, a birth control pill." The world came to a sudden, screeching halt. It was Jessica's voice that sliced through the suffocating silence. In Texas, that's reproductive coercion. If he's been giving you this without your knowledge, it's assault. Madison couldn't draw a breath, but sources tell me the first words out of her mouth were, "I'm pregnant." And in that moment, Madison's entire world began to unravel. I'm told Dr. Evans set the vitamin bottle down on the desk with deliberate care, asking if she'd been taking them consistently. Madison's mind raced back 7 weeks to a work trip to San Antonio, to a design consultation that ran late. In the frantic rush, she'd left the pills behind. 3 days, she'd skipped 3 days. I missed a few, she admitted. Late October, I was traveling for my job. Dr. Evans reportedly pulled up a calendar on her monitor. That matches your conception window. Madison was trembling, but she knew this was impossible. My husband Ryan had a vasectomy 5 years ago. She had the paperwork to prove it, a consent form she'd found tucked away. The doctor exchanged a glance with Chloe, Madison's closest friend. Do you have that form? Chloe produced a photocopy from her purse, and, as doctor, Evans scanned the document. Her professional neutrality hardened into something that looked a lot like anger. The file painted a damning picture. Ryan was just 30 years old when he had it done, using a surgical ligation method. Critically, he had declined all follow-up testing. The doctor turned her screen toward Madison, showing her a medical study. Vasectomies aren't foolproof, Madison, she explained. The younger a man is, the higher the risk of something called recanalization. It means the vas deferens can literally reconnect on its own. It's a rare phenomenon, happening in about 1% of cases, but it happens. And the surgical method Ryan chose has a higher failure rate than others. Without the follow-up tests, he would have had no way of knowing it had failed. Chloe leaned in, putting the pieces together. So, the vasectomy might not have worked. Dr. Evans confirmed, it's possible. Late recanalization 5 years out is extremely rare, the doctor continued. But given his age, the method, and the lack of verification, it's within the realm of medical probability. I can only imagine the silence in that room as Madison processed it all. Then, the one question that exposed the entire lie. If he had a vasectomy that might have failed, why give her birth control pills disguised as vitamins? The doctor's voice was quiet. If he wasn't certain the vasectomy had worked, the pills would have been a backup. Insurance. 2 layers of contraception. Chloe's jaw tightened as the reality sunk in. And when you stop taking the pills, even for 3 days, she said, looking at Madison, both layers failed? That's how you got pregnant? Dr. Evans finished the thought. The vasectomy had likely failed without Ryan's knowledge, and Madison had missed just enough pills for ovulation to occur. It was, as she put it, the medical equivalent of lightning striking twice. Madison just sat there, numb. Ryan had planned for everything. 2 safeguards, 2 colossal lies, and the only reason she was now pregnant was because she'd forgotten to pack a bottle of pills on a business trip. She looked at Chloe, lost. What do I do? Her friend's response was immediate and firm. You go to Christmas dinner and you tell him. Madison left the clinic in a complete daze. Chloe drove her home, but I'm told Madison sat in the driveway for a full 20 minutes, just staring at the house she and Ryan had bought together. The house she thought was their sanctuary. She replayed it all. The secret recording she'd made, the $75,000, the fake diagnosis, the pills she'd swallowed every single morning, trusting him. And she thought about the baby growing inside her, the one thing Ryan had fought so desperately to prevent. By the time she walked through her front door, a decision had been made. She would go to Christmas dinner. She would sit at that table with his parents, David and Carol, and with Ryan. And, as she later told a friend, she would burn it all to the ground. She walked into that Christmas season armed with three secrets: a recording, a pregnancy, and a plan. The days that followed were a master class in performance. She smiled at Ryan over their morning coffee and asked about his meetings. She nodded along as he discussed a new property development, all while pretending she didn't know he was funneling company money to a woman named Jessica Blake up in Seattle. She played the part she'd been cast in for 2 years, the compliant wife who never asked the difficult questions. But this time, she was acting with purpose, knowing exactly when the curtain was set to fall. Every morning, Ryan would hand her the orange pill bottle. "Don't forget your vitamins," he'd say, kissing her forehead. She'd swallow the pill right in front of him, thank him, and then wait for him to leave before going to the bathroom to check the identical bottle Chloe had given her. Same orange plastic, same prescription label, but inside were actual prenatal vitamins, the kind that support a healthy pregnancy, not prevent one. Chloe had made the switch while Ryan was on a business trip to Houston, and he was completely oblivious. For the first time in their marriage, Madison was secretly taking care of herself, and he didn't even notice. She found Eleanor's note on a gray afternoon, buried in boxes in the guest room closet. They were items from Ryan's grandmother's estate that his father hadn't wanted. Most of it was just old books and faded photos, but tucked inside a leather journal was a handwritten card on beautiful cream stationery. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and unmistakably feminine. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, dated October 2016, just months before Eleanor Hayes passed away. With trembling hands, Madison read it. "For whoever carries our family name forward with honor, legacy isn't blood, it's dignity. What we build matters less than how we treat the people we build it with. Remember that when the men in this family forget." The signature was clear. Eleanor Hayes. Madison stared at the words. Eleanor had known. She had seen what her son, David, was, what her family was becoming. She'd left this note behind like a message in a bottle. Madison folded it carefully and slipped it into her wallet. It felt like armor. 3 days before Christmas, Carol called. Her voice was painfully bright, a tone Madison knew was a prelude to bad news disguised as an invitation. "Madison, darling, I wanted to let you know we've invited a guest to Christmas dinner. Jessica Blake. She's an old friend of Ryan's, and we thought it would be just lovely to have her join us." Madison gripped the phone, her knuckles turning white. "Jessica Blake." She repeated the name, her voice completely flat. "Yes, such a charming woman. Ryan speaks so highly of her." Of course they'd invited her. It was a calculated move, forcing her to sit at the same table as the woman her husband was funding, the woman he planned to marry. They thought this final humiliation would be the thing to break her. But instead, Madison's voice came out steady and cool. "That sounds lovely," she said. "I look forward to meeting her." Carol was clearly thrown by her calm. "Oh, well, good. We'll see you at 6. After hanging up, she immediately called Chloe, who spent the next 2 days preparing for war. She drafted a counter-divorce proposal that was brutal and precise, built on every piece of evidence they had: the recording, the bank statements, the pills, the fake medical diagnosis. In Texas, reproductive coercion and drugging a spouse are grounds for a fault-based divorce. Chloe outlined it all in cold, clinical, legal language. On the morning of Christmas Eve, she arrived at Madison's house with a thick manila envelope sealed with official looking red tape. "Everything's in here," she said. "Bank statements, vasectomy records, the prescription bottle, the USB drive, and your counter proposal. If they try to blindside you tonight, you pull this out. You don't negotiate. You show them what's inside and you walk out." Madison stared at the envelope. It looked so ordinary, yet it contained the power to dismantle 2 years of lies. "What if I freeze?" she asked, her voice small. Chloe squeezed her hand. "You won't. You've been preparing for this without even knowing it. Every time you said no to him, every time you locked a door, every time you chose yourself, you were getting ready for tonight." Chloe made her practice for hours, rehearsing how to stay calm, how to deliver the facts without a trace of emotion. "You're not asking for permission," Chloe told her, again and again. "You're informing them of reality." That night, Madison stood before her mirror and practiced one last time, looking at the woman who had spent 2 years shrinking herself to fit into a family that never wanted her. She said the words aloud. "I'm not broken. I'm not ashamed. I'm done." She repeated it until her voice was steady. Then she took Eleanor's note from her wallet. "Legacy isn't blood, it's dignity." She folded it and tucked it deep into the pocket of the red dress she'd chosen for the evening. It felt like a talisman, as if Eleanor herself were standing beside her, giving her permission. Christmas Eve arrived. She put on the red dress, checked her reflection, and picked up Chloe's envelope from the counter. It felt heavy, weighted with consequence. Then she got in her car and drove to the Hayes estate in Westlake Hills, the same house where she'd swallowed her pride more times than she could count. Tonight, she knew, she would either break or finally be free. From everything I've gathered about what came next, Madison was betting everything she had on freedom. The story of that Christmas dinner is one of confrontation, revelation, and a woman taking back her power in the most spectacular way possible. The Hayes estate glittered, a perfect lie wrapped in thousands of fairy lights. When Madison pulled into the circular driveway just after 6 o'clock, her headlights swept across the limestone facade and the towering oak trees draped in white. The front door was adorned with magnolia and red velvet, the whole scene ripped from a holiday catalog. Pristine, perfect, and completely fake. Madison felt that old, familiar reflex kick in, the urge to smooth her dress, to check her reflection, to make herself smaller. But then her fingers brushed against the folded note in her pocket, Eleanor's words a silent anchor, and the reflex simply died. The story I pieced together began on a cold night in a lavish Austin foyer. But Adrienne Walsh hadn't come to socialize. She was there to start a war. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of money and perfume. My sources counted 22 guests, executives and partners from Sterling Properties, a few high society families, and Donovan's parents, Warren and Celeste, displayed like a power couple. I was told she spotted Gerald Tucker by the bar, the very man whose project she designed while her husband, Donovan Sterling, quietly sabotaged her career. Accounts say he gave her a polite, empty nod, and she returned it. A server offered her champagne, which she accepted but never drank. She knew she had to stay sharp, to burn every detail of that night into her memory. That's when she saw Sienna Blake by the fireplace. Tall and poised in an emerald silk dress that cost a fortune, her dark hair was perfectly styled. Sienna hadn't noticed her yet, but it was the earrings that stopped Adrienne cold. I learned they were antique cut emeralds haloed by diamonds. She recognized them from a photo on Celeste's vanity. They had belonged to Donovan's late aunt, Eleanor Sterling. Celeste giving them to Sienna was a brutal, silent message. This is the woman we have chosen. This is who belongs now. A cold knot of certainty formed in her chest, but her expression, I'm told, remained perfectly unreadable. Then Sienna turned, her polite smile faltering slightly as she recognized Adrienne from descriptions she'd been given. "You must be Adrienne," she said, her voice smooth and practiced as she offered a hand. It was the confident tone of a woman used to command. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Adrienne took her hand. The handshake was firm. It was clear Sienna had no clue what was about to unfold. "Nice to meet you, too," Adrienne reportedly said. And she meant it. Sienna wasn't the target. She was just another piece in Donovan's game. Just then, the front door opened and Celeste's voice rang out. "Trevor, what a wonderful surprise." In the doorway stood Trevor Sterling, Donovan's cousin, his face a mask of neutrality. Adrian's ally, Harper, was at his side, her hand resting on his arm, and a wave of profound relief washed over Adrienne. Harper had brought him. She had brought reinforcements. Donovan emerged from a hallway, his confident smile vanishing the moment he saw his cousin. "Cousin," he said, the word coming out stiff. "Didn't expect to see you." Trevor's own smile was pure ice. "Harper invited me," he replied. "I hope that's not a problem." It was Warren's voice that answered, sharp and cold. "Of course not. Family is always welcome." But his eyes told a different story. Trevor's presence was a living reminder of the sister Warren had ruined and the nephew he had cast aside. His arrival was a crack in the Sterling family's pristine facade, and witnesses saw the patriarch's jaw tighten. When dinner was called, they were led to a ridiculously long dining table set for 28, drowning in white linen and gold-rimmed china. Adrienne found herself seated between Donovan and Celeste, a carefully planned cage. Harper and Trevor were placed directly across the table, too far to speak with easily, but close enough for her to see their steady faces. Sienna Blake was seated near Warren, in the chair that should have been Adrienne's. When the first course of oysters arrived, the room filled with the kind of hollow small talk that Adrienne despised. That's when Warren stood up. He tapped his crystal glass with a knife, and the clean, sharp sound sliced through the chatter. The room fell silent. Every eye was on the head of the table. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Warren began, his voice exuding control. "It's wonderful to be with friends and family. Before we proceed, Donovan has something he'd like to share." He then sat, a look of smug expectation on his face. All eyes shifted to Donovan. He was smiling, but sources described it as fragile, almost desperate. He stood, cleared his throat, and pulled a manila folder from a briefcase at his feet. Adrienne's heart began to hammer against her ribs. He placed the folder directly in front of her. The quiet in the room was absolute. "Adrienne," Donovan said, his voice carrying to every corner. "I believe it's time for some honesty. Our marriage is over. It has been for some time. My attorney has prepared a settlement. The house, $200,000 and an NDA. It's quite generous. You just have to sign." He pushed the folder toward her, his hands steady, his gaze frigid. "Let's end this cleanly right now." She just stared at the folder. Her name was typed on the label, Adrienne Walsh Sterling. Around her, she could feel the air shift, a collective gasp as the guests, now an audience, fixed their eyes on her. Gerald Tucker looked deeply uncomfortable. Celeste, however, looked victorious. Sienna had gone pale, And Warren, Donovan's father, looked absolutely furious. He shot up from his chair, its legs scraping loudly on the floor. "Donovan," he said through gritted teeth, "we agreed this would be handled in private." But Donovan ignored his father, his eyes still locked on his wife. "I am handling it," he retorted. "You're making a spectacle," Warren hissed back. "This isn't the plan." "I'm finishing the plan." Donovan's voice grew louder, and it was then that Adrian understood. He was savoring this. He wanted to shatter her in front of everyone they knew. He expected tears, begging, a quiet signature before she scurried away in shame. He thought a public gutting would break her will. She looked from the folder to Harper, whose expression was a picture of calm. That's when Harper reached into her own briefcase and retrieved a thick, sealed envelope. She slid it across the table to Adriana. "Everything you need," Harper's quiet, steady voice said. "It's all in there." The room was dead silent. Every single person was staring at that envelope. Donovan's smug smile finally began to crack. Warren's expression, I'm told, shifted from anger to alarm. Adrian picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, filled with the weight of Harper's 2-week investigation. She broke the red tape seal slowly, deliberately. The first thing she pulled out was Eleanor's note, the one she'd found hidden away, the one that had given her the strength for this moment. She unfolded it and placed it right next to Donovan's settlement offer, Eleanor's elegant handwriting on full display. Then she reached back into the envelope. "Let me show you what else is in here," she announced, her voice ringing with newfound calm. She looked directly at Donovan, at Warren, at Celeste, and at the 22 stunned faces watching her. And then, I'm told, she smiled. Ignoring Donovan's folder completely, she pulled the first document from Harper's envelope. It was a bank statement, marked with a yellow highlighter, detailing 15 wire transfers to an entity called SB Consulting LLC. "This," she said, holding it up for all to see, "shows $75,000 moved from our joint account to a company owned by Sienna Blake." She looked right at Sienna. The color drained from Sienna's face. "The woman my husband has been financing for over a year, the woman he intended to marry as soon as I was gone." She laid the statement down and reached into the envelope again. "This," she continued, pulling out the next paper, "is a consent form from a men's health clinic in San Antonio. The patient's name is Donovan James Sterling. The date of the procedure was July 15th, 2018. The procedure listed is a bilateral vasectomy." She slid the form to the center of the table. "My husband had a vasectomy 5 years ago. He was 30 years old. He walked into that clinic and ensured he could never have children, and he never bothered to tell me." A wave of gasps went through the room. Donovan's face had turned a sickly shade of gray. Adrian reached into the envelope again. "This," she said, producing an orange prescription bottle, "is labeled as prenatal vitamins. My husband handed me one of these every single morning for 2 years. He said it would help us get pregnant." She placed the bottle on the table. "It isn't a prenatal vitamin. It's Lostrin, a birth control pill. He was drugging me every day without my knowledge or consent." The room erupted into a storm of frantic whispers. She let them. Then she reached in one last time and pulled out a small USB drive. "And this," she said, holding it up, "is a recording of my husband and his father in Donovan's car 2 weeks ago, planning exactly how to get rid of me." She looked at Harper, who placed a small Bluetooth speaker on the table. Adrian handed her the drive. A moment later, The clear, unmistakable voices of Warren and Donovan Sterling filled the dining room. It's time to end this, Donovan. Cleanly, quietly. We'll offer her the house and 200,000. She'll sign the NDA. You'll be free by Valentine's Day. What about the house? Her name's on the deed. The house stays in the family. We buy her out. She takes the money, signs, and disappears. Sienna's ready. You can announce the engagement on Valentine's Day if you want. A clean break, a fresh start. And if she doesn't sign, she will. Women like her always do. The recording stopped. The silence that fell was heavy and absolute. 22 guests stared from the speaker to Donovan, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. Gerald Tucker looked ill. Celeste's mouth hung open. Warren's face was a mask of stone, but fury burned in his eyes. Donovan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. That's when Adrian stood, the sound of her chair scraping across the floor, echoing in the silence. "My name is Adrian Walsh," she declared, her voice calm and powerful. "And for the past 2 years, I have been the victim of reproductive coercion, fraud, and assault." From what I've pieced together, Adrian Walsh started her offensive quietly, pulling a set of documents from her bag. The first paper she laid on the polished dining table was a consent form from July 15, 2018. It was for a vasectomy, signed by her husband Ryan when he was just 30 years old, a secret procedure he'd undergone in San Antonio. She pushed the document forward for the guests to see, a chilling piece of evidence. I learned he never told her, instead letting her believe for 2 years they were trying for a baby. He even took her to a doctor who, under his influence, diagnosed her with a non-existent condition to explain their infertility. The next item she presented was a simple prescription bottle. My source described how she explained that her husband, Ryan, handed her one of these pills every morning, calling them prenatal vitamins to help her conceive. But as she placed the bottle on the table, she revealed the truth. They were low-dose birth control pills. He was methodically drugging her every day. A guest, a young woman named Chloe Blake, reportedly made a strangled sound. Witnesses saw the blood drain from her face as the story clicked into place. She apparently whispered that Ryan's mother, Jessica, had told her the marriage was a sham, that Adrian was just after their money. Adrian confirmed it, telling Chloe she'd been lied to, just like everyone else. I was told Chloe's hands trembled as she removed the emerald earrings she was wearing, family heirlooms, and placed them on the table. She stood up, her voice tight with disgust, declaring she wanted no part of their deception. Looking directly at Ryan and his parents, David and Jessica, she called them monsters before walking out, the slam of the front door echoing like a verdict. Adrian then presented her final document, a medical report from a Dr. Emily Carter. It confirmed she was 8 weeks pregnant, sending a shockwave through the room. She had to raise her voice over the noise to explain the impossible. Ryan's vasectomy had failed. The procedure had spontaneously reversed itself. This rare complication, known as recanalization, affects a tiny percentage of cases, but Ryan never knew because he'd skipped the follow-up tests. The birth control pills were his backup plan, a second layer of deceit. But during a work trip, Adrienne forgot to take them, and both of his safeguards collapsed. She looked right at him and said, "I'm pregnant with your child," the very child he'd committed crimes to prevent. At that moment, his cousin, Tyler Sterling, rose to his feet. He announced he would testify, not just about Ryan, but about a decades-long pattern of abuse and manipulation orchestrated by the family patriarch David. He told Adrian he wouldn't let them victimize another woman. As David's face contorted in rage, Tyler asserted his right to speak as a member of the family. Adrian's lawyer, Madison, then handed her a folder containing a counterproposal, and Adrian calmly laid out her terms. She demanded the house, their entire $1.2 million property. She also demanded $425,000 in damages for the fraud and emotional distress he'd caused. Then, looking at Ryan, she specified he would pay $8,500 a month in child support, 20% of his income, per Texas state law. She placed the terms before his father, David. In return, she would not press criminal charges for assault, which, under Texas law, is exactly what drugging someone is. She gave them 48 hours to sign, making it clear that if they didn't, she would go to the police and every journalist in Austin with her story. She then addressed the 22 dinner guests who had witnessed the complete implosion of the Sterling family dynasty, wished them a Merry Christmas, and walked out. Her lawyer followed, their heels clicking on the marble floor as chaos erupted behind them. Shouts, scraping chairs, and Jessica's frantic denials. Adrian never looked back. She made it to Madison's car, and only when the door was closed did the dam break. A source close to her told me they weren't tears of sadness, but of profound relief. 2 years of being silenced and diminished came pouring out of her in shuddering sobs. Madison simply started the car and drove. Madison didn't need to say a word. She'd already given Adrian the only advice that mattered, that she wasn't asking for their permission. She was informing them of the new reality. Adrian had walked into that house as the wife they thought they could control and walked out as herself again, Adrian Walsh. There was no going back to the home she shared with Ryan, to the bed where he'd lied to her face every single morning for 2 years. Madison understood this without being told. She just drove, one hand resting on the console between them, a silent, steady anchor as they moved through the empty streets. It was Christmas Eve in Austin, and as they drove past houses glowing with warmth, I'm told Adrian felt like she was seeing her city for the first time. Madison took her to her downtown apartment, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. She instructed Adrian to sit on the couch while she got her some water. The adrenaline that had fueled Adrian through the confrontation was now gone, leaving her hollowed out and shaking. She had detonated her own life in front of 24 people. And now, the fallout was setting in. Madison returned, draping a heavy blanket over her shoulders. "You did it," she said quietly. Adrian could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She had faced down David, Jessica, and Ryan, armed herself with the truth, and had emerged on the other side, completely transformed. Then her phone began to buzz incessantly. It was a barrage of calls and texts from Ryan, then his father, David. The notifications piled up. The first message from Ryan was a desperate plea. "We need to talk. This is insane." It was followed by another, begging her to reconsider. David's text was far more menacing. "You've made a serious mistake. We'll see you in court." Her lawyer, Madison, saw the messages and her expression hardened. She instructed Adrian to block all of them immediately. Despite her hesitation, she knew Madison was right. "All contact goes through your attorney now," Madison told her. "That's me." So she blocked Ryan's number, then David's, and then Jessica's for good measure. The resulting silence was immediate. Soon after, a text from Tyler came through, giving her an update from inside the house. He reported that David had left 20 minutes after her without a word, while Ryan had stayed, smashing a wine glass and screaming at his mother. The guests were already talking. The story was spreading like wildfire. She texted back, thanking him for his support, and he replied instantly, telling her she was incredible. When she told Madison, her lawyer simply nodded. Good, she said. The more people who know what they did, the harder it will be for them to control the narrative. With 22 witnesses, the truth was no longer a secret they could bury. David could no longer spin the story. Adrian thought of the guests, powerful executives and high society families who lived on gossip. She knew that by the next morning, the scandal would be the talk of Austin's elite circles. That thought, which once would have been terrifying, now brought a strange comfort. The secret was out, and its weight was no longer hers to carry alone. Madison handed her a cup of tea and told her to get some sleep, that tonight was just for rest. As she held the warm mug, Adrienne quietly voiced her deepest fear, that she would have to raise this baby alone. But Madison's response was firm. You can, she said. You're one of the strongest people I know. And you're not alone. She reminded Adrienne of her support system, her mother, Tyler, and Madison herself. You've got people, Addie. This brought on a new wave of tears, but these were quiet and full of gratitude. I'm going to be a mother, she whispered, and Madison smiled, assuring her she'd be an incredible one. I learned that she eventually fell asleep on Madison's couch, exhausted but feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had walked into that Christmas dinner as a victim, but she had walked out a survivor. The sun would rise tomorrow, and she would be ready to build her new life. I'm told that on that particular night, Madison Walsh finally gave herself permission to rest. What she couldn't have known then was that the baby she was carrying was a boy. Nor could she know that in 3 weeks, another of the Sterling family's secrets would come to light. One that Eleanor Sterling had carefully shielded within legal documents and trust funds, a secret that would anchor her child's future in ways Madison couldn't yet fathom. But she was about to find out. And once she did, it would become clear that Eleanor had been waiting for someone exactly like Madison all along. A fighter, a survivor. She drifted off to sleep on her friend Chloe's couch that night, enveloped in a quiet safety she hadn't known for years. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she slept soundly until morning. Ryan's attorney made the call on December 26th, while Madison and Chloe were nursing coffee and nibbling on leftover Christmas cookies. When Chloe's phone buzzed, she glanced at the screen, her eyes finding Madison's. It's them, she said, her voice low. Madison carefully set down her mug, and, from what I've gathered, her hands were perfectly steady. Chloe put the call on speaker. This is Chloe Quinn. The man's voice was polished and professional, the kind designed to neutralize tension before it begins. Miss Quinn, my name is Richard Brennan, and I'm representing Ryan Sterling. My client is now prepared to negotiate settlement terms. Chloe's expression, I'm told, remained unreadable. I'm listening. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer continued, was offering Madison the Clarksville property and $200,000, provided she sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement and drop all claims. Chloe let the silence hang in the air. Then, her response was a simple, firm no. Brennan sounded taken aback. I'm sorry. Chloe didn't hesitate. Your client drugged my client without her knowledge for 2 years straight. Under Texas Penal Code 22.01, that constitutes assault. If Mr. Sterling rejects our terms by 5 p.m. today, a police report will be filed tomorrow. And I will be copying the Austin American-Statesman on the press release. After another tense pause, Brennan's voice was quieter. What are your terms? Chloe laid them out with chilling precision. 100% ownership of the $1.2 million Clarksville house, $425,000 in damages for fraud and emotional distress, $8,500 a month in child support, and a complete relinquishment of Ryan's custody and visitation rights. The agreement stipulated that Madison would have sole legal and physical custody, and Ryan's name would be removed from the birth certificate. He was to have no part in the child's life. In exchange for this, Madison would not pursue criminal charges, and both would sign the non-disclosure agreement. Brennan said he would need to call back. He did, just 2 hours later. "We agree to the terms," he stated. "The paperwork will be drafted by January 10th. Those next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of legal documents and phone calls. I learned that Chloe meticulously walked Madison through every single clause, ensuring she understood the rights she was securing and the silence she was agreeing to. The NDA meant she could never speak publicly about the deception. But she had already shared her truth with 22 people on Christmas Eve. The story was already in motion. The NDA was merely Warren's futile attempt at damage control. On the 10th of January, Madison sat in Chloe's office and signed her name 37 times. Ryan was notably absent, sending his signature via courier. Chloe witnessed the final page, then handed Madison a leather-bound copy. "It's done," she confirmed. Madison looked down at the folder. The name embossed on the cover was Adrienne Walsh, not Sterling, just Walsh. She was finally free. She moved back into the Clarksville home the following day. Ryan had already removed all of his belongings, his clothes, his laptop, and the framed photos of him and his father at various company groundbreakings. Sources close to her say the house felt enormous without him, lighter somehow, as if she could finally take a full breath. Her mother drove in from San Antonio to help her repaint the second bedroom. They settled on a soft, calming sage green. A white wooden crib was ordered online, and her friend Constance assembled a changing table, while Madison sorted through piles of baby clothes. A friend named Jessica had sent a package of tiny onesies and soft blankets in shades of blue and yellow. "You are going to be a wonderful mother," her mom said quietly, folding a small outfit with a dinosaur on it. Madison looked at the woman who had raised her single-handedly, the woman who had worked 2 jobs to send her to design school and never made her feel like a burden. "I really hope so," Madison replied, her voice thick with emotion. Her mother just smiled. "I know so." Madison returned to Dr. Morales for a checkup in the middle of January. An ultrasound confirmed a healthy baby with a strong heartbeat. Everything was exactly as it should be. "Would you like to find out the gender?" the doctor asked, her eyes on the monitor. Madison paused for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Yes," she whispered. The doctor smiled warmly. "It's a boy." A boy. Madison was going to have a son. The drive home was a blur, one hand resting on her stomach as she imagined all the things she needed to teach him. How to be kind, how to defend himself, and how to spot the suffocating grip of control and have the strength to walk away. She vowed he would grow up knowing he was cherished and safe. She would teach him that true legacy had nothing to do with money or a family name, but everything to do with how you treat people, with dignity. That night, she experienced a depth of sleep she hadn't known in 3 years. Not since before meeting Ryan, before becoming entangled with the Sterling family and shrinking herself to fit their world. She slept in her own bed, in her own house, her son growing safely inside her as her future unfolded before her like an open road. She didn't yet know that Eleanor Sterling had left her one final, life-altering gift. She couldn't have known that in less than a week, a certified letter from a Dallas law firm would arrive, a letter that would explain everything. It would explain why Eleanor had written that cryptic note about legacy and why she had buried a secret deep inside a trust fund. It was a letter that would prove Eleanor had been waiting for someone like her all along. 3 weeks after that Christmas, the letter showed up. And as Madison read it, she realized Eleanor hadn't just believed in her, she had planned for her. She was in the nursery folding tiny clothes on a gray January afternoon when she heard the mailbox click shut. Downstairs, she found a thick, certified envelope on her porch. The return address was for a law firm she didn't recognize, Bernard Klein and Associates, Dallas, Texas. Her heart sank, bracing for another legal fight. With trembling hands, she ripped open the envelope. The letter began, "Dear Ms. Walsh, I am writing to inform you that you have been designated as the guardian and trustee of the Eleanor Owens Sterling Trust, established in 2016. As the mother of Ryan Sterling's biological child, you are now responsible for managing the trust assets on behalf of your son, the primary beneficiary." The letter instructed her to contact the office to review the documents. She read it 3 times, the words blurring together. Guardian, trustee, Eleanor Owens Sterling Trust. It made no sense. Eleanor had passed away in 2016. Madison had never even met her. She'd only seen a photograph of her once, tucked away in a box in Ryan's closet. How could she have possibly left a trust for a son who didn't exist yet? How could she have known he would ever be born? Madison immediately called Chloe, who answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I just got a letter," Madison said, her voice tight. "From a lawyer in Dallas. It's about a trust, Eleanor Sterling's trust. I don't understand." After a beat, Chloe's voice was firm. "I'm coming over now. Don't do anything until I get there," she instructed. 2 days later, they made the drive to Dallas. Chloe had insisted on coming, and Madison was deeply grateful. The offices of Bernard Klein were on the 30th floor of a gleaming glass tower that smelled of leather and influence. A receptionist guided them into a large conference room with a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Bernard Klein appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that held the calm assurance of a man who had spent a lifetime safeguarding fortunes. He shook Madison's hand, invited them to sit, and opened a thick leather binder on the mahogany table. "Ms. Walsh," he began, "I've been the manager of the Eleanor Sterling Trust since its creation in March of 2016. He went on to explain, "Mrs. Sterling approached me 8 months before she passed away. She wanted me to establish an irrevocable trust for her first grandchild. At that point, Ryan had no children and, from what Klein understood, no plans for any. But Mrs. Sterling was incredibly insistent," he said. "She wanted to guarantee that if a grandchild were ever born, they would have financial security entirely independent of the Sterling family." Madison stared at him, speechless. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. Mr. Klein's professional demeanor softened. "She told me her son, Warren Sterling, had become a man she no longer recognized. She described the family as toxic, and she said she didn't trust them to do what was right by any child born into it. So she took her personal assets, investments, inherited property, her own savings, and created a trust that neither Warren nor Ryan could ever touch." Chloe leaned forward, her lawyerly instincts kicking in. "How much are we talking about?" Mr. Klein delivered the news directly. "The trust is currently valued at $580,000. It will continue to grow through conservative investments until the beneficiary turns 25, at which point he will gain full access." $580,000 for Owen, for her son. Eleanor had done this years before. Madison was even a part of the story, securing a future for a child she would never meet. She had glimpsed the truth of that family and moved to shield a child who hadn't even been born. The family lawyer, Mr. Klein, pushed a sealed envelope across the polished table. "Mrs. Sterling left this for the person who would raise her grandchild," he explained. "She instructed me to give it to you at the appropriate time." From what I was told, Madison's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter I later saw a copy of was penned in an elegant script on cream-colored paper. It began, "To whoever raises my grandchild, if you are reading this, it means Warren did not manage to erase my memory completely. It means my grandchild is real, and you are the one looking after them. I can't know who you are, but I pray you are strong." It continued, "I pray you are kind, and I pray you know that the Sterling name isn't a privilege, it's a burden." She detailed establishing the trust back in the spring of 2016. The moment she accepted her son had become a man who would inflict pain to keep his power. "I saw what he did to his own sister. I saw how he raised Ryan. I knew any grandchild of mine born into this family would need protection from those claiming to love them. This money is not Warren's. It is not Ryan's," she wrote. "It is mine, earned through a lifetime of quiet defiance. Use it for my grandchild's education, their future, their independence. Do not allow the Sterling family to dictate who this child becomes. A legacy isn't about blood, it's about dignity. It's the decision to value kindness over power. It is about building something that endures, not because it has your name on it, but because it embodies your values. Raise my grandchild to be better than we ever were. That is my only request. With hope, Eleanor Owen Sterling." I was told that when Madison put the letter down, tears were already falling, and she made no move to stop them. Eleanor had known. She had anticipated what her family was capable of, and she had resisted in the only way available to her. She had constructed a financial fortress around a child she would never know, trusting that someone, in this case, Madison, would be there to hold the line. Madison's friend, Jessica, found her hand under the table. Mr. Klein, my sources said, waited with quiet patience as she gathered herself. Finally, she looked at him. "What do I need to do?" "Sign the trust documents," he replied. "Accept the position of trustee. Manage these funds for your son's benefit. The trust is airtight. Warren and Ryan have no legal claim. They cannot contest it. They cannot access it. They cannot touch a single cent. It is yours to manage for Owen." Owen. It was a name Madison hadn't shared with anyone yet, but hearing it spoken aloud in that room with Eleanor's letter on the table felt profoundly right. She signed the papers. Jessica served as the witness. Mr. Klein presented her with the official trust agreement in a binder, and their meeting concluded. On the drive back to Austin, Jessica asked, "How did you pick the name Owen?" Madison reportedly looked out at the highway unfolding before them. "It was Eleanor's maiden name, Eleanor Owen Sterling. I wanted a way to honor her. She gave my son a future. The least I can do is give him a name that remembers where his real protection came from. Not from the Sterling men, but from a woman who cared enough to save him before he even existed." Jessica just smiled. "It's perfect." Madison touched her stomach, feeling the baby move. Eleanor Sterling had been gone for 8 years, but in that moment, she was a tangible presence, offering them a path forward, a connection between a painful past and a hopeful future. And Madison made a promise to herself, in that car, that she would raise her son just as Eleanor had wished, with dignity, with kindness, and with the understanding that a true legacy has nothing to do with money or a family name. It was about the choices you make, the people you protect, and the love you offer without strings attached. Owen would know that. She would make certain of it. While Madison was carefully constructing a nursery, Ryan's world was systematically collapsing. I pieced together the story from Jessica's guarded calls and occasional texts from another friend, Mark, but Madison herself maintained her distance. She didn't need a front row seat. She had Owen to focus on now, a life to build that had no connection to the Sterlings. But justice, as it turns out, has its own timetable. It came for them without her help. In February, a man named Gerald Tucker walked into a Sterling Properties board meeting flanked by a forensic accountant and carrying a folder thick with evidence. Ryan Sterling had been embezzling for 3 years. Over $300,000 had been quietly moved from client escrow funds, project budgets, and company accounts. The bulk of it, I uncovered, went to Sienna Blake's consulting firm. The $75,000 Madison had discovered was only the start. The rest had bankrolled Ryan's entire image. The Audi, the designer suits, the trips to Seattle he'd passed off as business. Gerald had launched his own quiet investigation back in January, right after that catastrophic Christmas dinner, where Madison laid out the audio recordings, the fake vitamins, and the vasectomy papers before 22 guests. He'd never liked Ryan, had watched for years as Ryan dismissed Madison's work and treated Gerald's own projects as mere stepping stones. But simple dislike was never enough to act on. Gerald needed hard proof. Once he finally started digging, he found it everywhere. The board terminated Ryan's employment on March 5th. His father, Warren, tried to shield him, calling it a misunderstanding, a simple bookkeeping error. But the proof was undeniable. Bank records, wire transfers, and emails between Ryan and Sienna were all there. The vote was unanimous. Ryan was out, and the board referred the case to the district attorney's office. Jessica called Madison that night. "It's over," she said. "He's gone." Madison put down the phone and stood in the quiet of the nursery, one hand on her belly, feeling the distinct flutter of a kick. She didn't feel victorious. She just felt exhausted and finally free. Warren Sterling tried to salvage the family name, but the damage was too severe. The Christmas dinner story had already ripped through Austin's tight-knit business world. 22 witnesses tend to have that effect. And now, his son's embezzlement was a headline in the Austin Business Journal. Clients started pulling their contracts. Investors began demanding answers. By April, the board formally requested Warren's resignation. He fought it, threatening lawsuits and calling in old favors, but Gerald Tucker had secured the votes. On April 22nd, Warren Sterling announced his immediate retirement. Gerald Tucker was named acting CEO, and a week later, the board made his position permanent. Warren was gone. The company he had built, the empire he tried to force upon his son, was now controlled by the very man Ryan had spent years trying to diminish. Jessica sent Madison the press release. She read it once and then deleted it. The game was over. Around the same time, Sienna Blake filed for a restraining order against Ryan in late April. According to my source Mark, Ryan had been relentlessly harassing her since Christmas, appearing at her Seattle office and sending unwanted gifts. She had blocked his number and changed her routine, but he persisted. A judge granted the order in less than 48 hours, prohibiting Ryan from coming within 500 feet of Sienna or making any contact. Mark also mentioned Sienna was exploring a civil suit for fraud. Dr. Raymond Peterson, the family physician, lost his medical license in May. Jessica had submitted a formal complaint to the Texas Medical Board in January, outlining the fraudulent PCOS diagnosis, the conspiracy to pass off birth control as prenatal vitamins, and Peterson's complete lack of a legitimate medical reason for his actions. The board launched a full investigation. They examined Madison's medical history, spoke with her new doctor, and subpoenaed Peterson's records. In May, their findings were clear. Peterson had committed multiple violations, including unprofessional conduct and failure to obtain informed consent. His license was suspended on the spot. By June, that suspension was made permanent. He could no longer practice medicine in the state of Texas. When Jessica called with the news, Madison wept. Not for him, but for every other patient he might have deceived, and for the simple fact that he had finally been held accountable. While the Sterling's world was imploding, Madison's was expanding. In March, she won a major contract to design the interiors for a new hotel. The owner, a friend of someone who had been at the Christmas dinner, had heard the entire story. By April, she had 2 more clients, a law firm and a family undertaking a massive home renovation. It turned out her reputation hadn't been destroyed by the scandal. It had been forged by it. In Austin, people admired someone who had faced down a powerful family and refused to break. They wanted to work with a designer who knew that a space was about more than how it looked. It was about creating a place where people felt secure and respected. She hired an assistant in May, a bright University of Texas graduate named Maya. Her business was taking off. Jessica and Mark became her anchors. Jessica arrived every Sunday with food and helped her assemble nursery furniture that had been shipped up from San Antonio. Mark sent her articles on parenting and texted his encouragement, even though he had no children of his own. "You're going to be an incredible mom," he told her over coffee one afternoon in June. "You already are." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Her own mom visited twice, once for the anatomy scan in April, and again for a baby shower in July that Jessica had insisted on hosting. It was a small circle, just Chloe, Tyler, her mom, and a couple of clients who had become her tribe. But I'm told it felt more like family than anything she'd ever known. This was the kind you choose, the kind that shows up. Ryan, I found out, had left Austin back in June, taking a position with a small-time commercial real estate firm up in Dallas. It was a fall from grace so severe, it was almost pitiful. But after the scandal, no one in Austin would touch him. The embezzlement allegations, the high-profile divorce, that disastrous Christmas dinner, it was all too public, too toxic. Sources told me he packed his apartment, didn't say a single goodbye, and simply vanished. Madison didn't know his new address. She didn't want to. He was gone from her life and from her sons, and that was the only thing that mattered. His father, Mark Hamilton, retreated to the family's sprawling estate in Westlake Hills. I heard through Tyler that the old man rarely left the mansion anymore, that his wife Celeste had ceased her famous dinner parties, and that the once unshakable Hamilton social empire had quietly crumbled. Legacy, as it turns out, is a fragile thing. You can pour a lifetime into building it, only to watch it shatter overnight. By July, Madison was 38 weeks pregnant, moving with the careful pace of late pregnancy, nesting with an intensity that made Chloe laugh. She washed the baby's clothes 3 separate times. She rearranged the nursery twice. The hospital bag was packed and then repacked. She was ready. She was petrified. She was, I'm told, more herself than she had been in a decade. On the night of August 9th, she went to bed early, a hand resting on her belly, feeling her son, Liam, shift and turn under her skin. Her thoughts were on Eleanor, on the trust she'd left for a child she'd never meet, on a note written to a stranger. My source tells me she thought about her own mother, who had raised her alone and shown her that strength wasn't about never falling, but about the grit to get back up. She thought about Chloe and Tyler, the family she had pieced together from the wreckage of the one she lost, and she thought about the future. Liam's future, a wide open canvas of possibility that had absolutely nothing to do with the Hamilton name. At 3:42 in the morning on August 10th, her water broke. Liam Michael Walsh came into the world on August 12th, 2024, at St. David's Medical Center. He was 7 pounds and 3 ounces, 20 inches long, with a shock of dark hair that reminded Madison of her own baby pictures. But the story doesn't start there. Let me take you to the beginning of the end, or maybe the beginning of everything. Her water broke at 3:42 a.m. on August 10th. She was asleep, the nursery door ajar, letting in the faint glow of a crescent moon nightlight. Then she felt a warm rush and sat bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a beat, she just sat in the darkness, a hand on her belly, thinking, "This is it. This is the moment it all changes." Her next move was to call her mom, who answered on the very first ring. For 2 weeks, I was told, she'd been sleeping with the phone on her pillow, waiting. "It's time," Madison said, and she could hear the sound of her mother already moving, already on her way. "I'm coming. Call Chloe. I'll meet you at the hospital." Chloe pulled up to the house 20 minutes later, still dressed in sweatpants and a university hoodie, her hair thrown into a messy bun. She guided Madison into the car, threw the hospital bag in the trunk, and navigated the empty, pre-dawn streets of Austin as if she were trying to qualify for a Formula One race. By the time they reached St. David's, the contractions were 5 minutes apart, sharp and all-consuming. Her mom met them right inside the lobby. She took one look at Madison and pulled her into an embrace that smelled of lavender and safety. "You can do this," she said. And in that moment, Madison believed her. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of a pain so profound it completely rewired her understanding of what the human body could withstand, of breathing through waves that felt like her spine was tearing apart, of Chloe patiently feeding her ice chips, and her mother clutching her hand, telling stories of when Madison was born, how she had done it all by herself in a San Antonio hospital with only a stranger for a nurse. "You are so much stronger than you know," she whispered, dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth. "You always were." By hour 10, Madison wasn't so sure she could believe her anymore. The exhaustion was bone deep. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else entirely, some primal force that was pulling Liam into the world with or without her consent. But Chloe was right there, holding her other hand, her voice a steady anchor. "You're almost there, Madison. You're doing it. You're bringing him home." And then, at 6:37 on the morning of August 12th, Liam Michael Walsh was born. The first thing she heard was his cry, a sharp, furious sound that sliced through the pain and the fog of exhaustion, filling the room with what she could only describe as pure light. The doctor gently placed him on her chest, a tiny perfect person with dark, wet hair and eyes blinking in the sudden brightness. She looked down at him, at his impossibly small fingers curled into fists, at a mouth opening and closing as if trying to form his first words, and she told me she felt a fundamental click deep inside her. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt completely whole. Her mom was beside the bed, silent tears tracking down her face. Chloe had her phone out, capturing it all, her own eyes glistening. "He's perfect," Chloe whispered. Madison, he's just perfect. She couldn't find the words to respond. She just held Liam, feeling his solid weight on her chest, his warmth seeping into her skin, and she finally understood what Eleanor's letter meant. Legacy wasn't blood, it was dignity. Liam wasn't a Hamilton. He would never have to bear that name, never be contorted by its demands for control and cold compliance. He was hers, and he was completely free. There were no flowers sent from the Hamiltons, no calls, no text messages, no cards. Ryan had signed away his parental rights, accepted the terms, and disappeared into his diminished life in Dallas. Mark and Celeste hadn't reached out since that Christmas, and Madison never expected they would. Liam would grow up without knowing them, and she was more than okay with that, because he would know his grandmother, who flew in from San Antonio and stayed for 2 weeks, teaching Madison how to change a diaper at 3 in the morning. He would know his Aunt Chloe, who appeared daily with coffee and food and a calming presence that made the impossible feel possible. And he would know Tyler. Tyler came to the hospital on the second day. He knocked softly before peeking his head in, a wide grin spreading across his face when he saw Liam asleep in Madison's arms. "He looks just like you," Tyler said, taking the chair next to her bed. "Got that same stubborn chin." She laughed, a sound full of exhaustion and pure gratitude. "Thanks for being here." Tyler watched Liam for a long moment, his gaze incredibly soft. "My mom would have adored him," he said, his voice low. "She would have loved you too. You're precisely the kind of person Eleanor always hoped would be here." Madison felt tears welling up. "I really wish I could have met her." "You did," Tyler replied. "In a way. She left you that trust, that letter." "She saw this family for what it was," he continued. "And she pushed back in the only way she knew how. You're just finishing the work she started." Madison looked down at Liam's tiny face and made a silent vow. She would raise him, just as Eleanor had hoped, with dignity, with kindness, and with the unwavering knowledge that he owed no one his silence. He was enough, exactly as he was. They went home 3 days later, not to the house she had shared with Ryan, but to the home she had built for them. It was a house in Clarksville with a sage green nursery, a rocking chair her mom had sent, and shelves already packed with books she dreamed of reading to Liam. Chloe drove, with her mom in the passenger seat, and Liam securely strapped into his car seat right next to Madison. She kept reaching over just to touch his hand, a constant check to confirm that he was real, that this new life wasn't some dream she would be shaken from. When they pulled into the driveway, she looked at the house, her house, and felt a profound sense of peace. This was home, not because of an address or the furniture inside, but because it belonged to them, a sanctuary where Liam would be safe, cherished, and free. As she carried him over the threshold, his small, warm body nestled against her, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as a team. Motherhood, I was told, was infinitely harder and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. That first month passed in a blur of sleepless nights, 2 a.m. feedings, and a desperate attempt to decode Liam's cries, constantly wondering if she was getting any of it right. But then he'd grow quiet, his tiny hand wrapping around her finger, and she would look at his face and feel a love so fierce it was breathtaking. It wasn't the complicated, conditional love she had unlearned from her marriage. This was something pure and absolute, the kind that asked for nothing in return. By October, they had settled into a rhythm. Liam smiled for the first time on a gray Tuesday, a lopsided, gummy grin that made her weep with joy. After that, the world felt a little less daunting. She began taking on small, part time design projects she could manage from home during his naps. The financial freedom from the settlement and Eleanor's trust gave her the ability to choose her own hours. Chloe's Sunday visits with coffee and bagels became a sacred ritual, holding Liam while Madison took a precious few minutes to herself. From what I gathered, Chloe had become his godmother in every way that counted. Tyler visited less frequently, but always came bearing books and stuffed animals that Liam would promptly try to chew on. Her mom flew in once a month from San Antonio, filling the house with the smell of home cooked meals and reminding Madison that she was doing a great job. December arrived, and with it, Liam's very first Christmas. I've pieced this story together from a source very close to the events, and it starts not with a bang, but with a quiet Christmas. A year after Madison walked away from the Sterling estate and her husband Ryan, the contrast was stark. While that mansion sat cold and silent, her small Clarksville house was warm. It was just her mother, her friends Chloe and Tyler, and her 4-month-old son, Leo. He was too little to know what was happening, but she held him close. And for the first time in years, she felt peace. What I learned is that she was building something Ryan could never give her: new traditions. By February, little Leo was sitting up on his own, his laughter filling the house whenever Tyler, Ryan's own cousin, would make a funny face. Madison had started her own nightly ritual, a quiet promise whispered to her son after his bath, a lesson she'd learned the hard way. She would tell him, "You are enough, Leo, just as you are. Your value doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from the fact that you exist and you are loved." He wouldn't understand the words. Not yet, but the feeling would sink in. Then, an echo from her old life arrived in the mail, an invitation to the Sterling Properties annual gala. The company was under new leadership. A man named James Bennett was now CEO, and the invitation felt like a carefully worded truce. My source says Madison held it for a long time before setting it down. When Chloe saw it that Sunday, she asked if Madison was going. The answer was simple: "I don't owe them anything. Not my time, not my presence, not even closure. I've already moved on." And she had. Instead of a ballroom, she chose a park. March came in bright and warm, and one Saturday she packed a picnic and drove with Leo to Zilker Park. Chloe and Tyler met them, laying out a blanket under an old oak tree. The first bluebonnets were starting to bloom, dotting the hills with color, and the park was alive with families. Leo, sat on the blanket, immediately tried to eat a fistful of grass. Chloe laughed, gently uncurling his fingers. "He's fearless," she said, "just like his mom." In that moment, Madison looked at the three people there with her. Chloe, who had been her rock when she felt she had nothing left. There was Tyler, who broke from his own family to tell the truth, and her mom, who had just flown in for the weekend. This, I was told, was her real family. Not the one defined by blood, and certainly not the toxic one she'd married into, but one she had built herself, piece by piece, from love and loyalty. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of simple happiness Ryan Sterling, with all his wealth, could never purchase. Tyler stretched out on the blanket and looked at the sky. "You know what Eleanor would say if she could see this?" he said to Madison. "She'd say, 'You did it. You broke the cycle.' And that was the heart of it, the truth I'd uncovered. The cycle of control, passed down from the Sterling patriarchs to Ryan, a legacy measured in power and cruelty. But Leo would never know that world. He would be raised to believe that kindness was worth more than wealth, and that a person's dignity was sacred." Tyler was right. The cycle was broken. As the sun began to set, Leo got fussy, and Madison picked him up, calming him instantly against her chest. Her friends began packing up around her, and in that moment, holding her son, she was surrounded by people who chose her, just as she had chosen them. This was her life now. It wasn't the future she saw when she first met Ryan 6 years prior. It was a life built on her own terms, a world away from the person the Sterlings had tried to mold her into. And it was, in her words, perfect. Looking into this story, I found that Madison wants her experience to be a warning. She once believed that staying silent would keep her safe. She thought making herself smaller would somehow earn Ryan's love. She was wrong. The betrayal of a family, she told me, cuts deeper than anything because it hides behind smiles and holiday dinners. It's a quiet poison. And when you finally recognize it, the anger is a storm that can threaten to swallow you whole. But here's the lesson she shared with me. Real revenge isn't about destruction. The ultimate victory against a toxic family is rebuilding your own life so beautifully that their poison can't touch you anymore. The best revenge is the peace they swore you'd never find without them. She urges others not to wait years to trust that feeling in their gut. Her advice is powerful. Do not ever believe your worth is tied to someone else's approval. God gives us instincts for a reason, she said. Listen to them. Your dignity is not negotiable. She insists that we must choose our family because blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and love should never cost you your soul. And her final point is the most important. You owe abusers absolutely nothing. Not your silence, not your forgiveness, not a single second chance. The story of what Ryan Sterling lost is truly told in the life Madison built after she left. Her hope is that her story matters, and that it reaches someone who needs to hear it. My thanks to the brave sources who helped bring this story to light. As a final note for our readers, some identifying details have been fictionalized for educational purposes and to protect those involved. But the core truth of this journey, from captivity to freedom, remains entirely real. Please, take care of yourself.